Okay, let's unpack this number. 684 trillion Vietnamese dong.
Hmm.
That's a figure that really jumps off the page, right? The reported debt for Vingroup, it sounds absolutely colossal.
It does. It's a huge number.
So our mission here in this deep dive is really to cut through some of that noise, get behind the headline figure, and, understand what's actually going on.
It's interesting. Vingroup's backstory is pretty remarkable. They built this formidable reputation primarily in real estate. Lots of wealth generated there.
Yeah, everyone knows their brands, like Vinhomes, those huge housing developments.
Exactly. And Vincom for the malls, Vinpearl for resorts. They've genuinely reshaped large parts of Vietnam's landscape, both urban and leisure.
Totally. And they weren't afraid to branch out, were they? I remember the Vinmart electronic stores.
Oh, yeah.
And they even had a go at making gasoline cars for a while.
They did. Those were, well, ambitious moves.
Yeah.
Didn't quite stick in the long run, though.
No, and it clearly meant shifting significant resources around when they pulled back from those.
That's a really key point, actually. Because those earlier pivots, you could argue, kind of set the stage for what came next. For VinFast.
Right.
Which is where Vingroup has placed this enormous bet, a full-on charge into the electric vehicle market.
And the financial commitment there has been, well, you said it, on a totally different scale.
Completely different. Astronomical, really.
Different scale, might even be putting it mildly. So for this deep dive, using the info you shared, our goal is really to dissect this debt mountain. Where's it coming from? What might it mean for Vingroup?
And VinFast seems central to that whole picture.
Definitely feels like the linchpin. So yeah, let's get into it.
Okay, first off, to really get a handle on this, you need to understand Vingroup's structure.
Yeah.
It operates as a holding company.
Right, so like a parent company.
Exactly. The parent basically holds shares in all these subsidiary companies, and it's those subsidiaries that are actually doing the day-to-day business operations.
So Vingroup itself isn't directly building the houses or assembling the cars. That's Vinhomes or VinFast doing that work.
Precisely.
And if you wanted to gauge Vingroup's overall health, financially speaking, you'd essentially add up the value or look at the performance of all those separate arms combined.
You got it. So now let's talk about that debt number and how it grew. One source we looked at points to this really dramatic jump in Vingroup's net debt.
Net debt. Okay, remind us.
Sure. Net debt is basically all the money a company owes minus any cash or easily accessible cash equivalents it has on hand.
Got it. So what was the jump?
Well, according to this source, Vingroup's net debt went from roughly 40 trillion VND back in 2017,
Okay.
which significantly is when the VinFast project kicked off.
Ah, interesting timing.
Right. And it surged to around 220 trillion VND by the end of 2024.
Wow. Okay. That's more than a five-fold increase in, 7 years?
Yeah, massive jump.
And it seems pretty clear where that increase is linked to, funding VinFast.
Overwhelmingly. Financed through things like long-term bonds, big bank loans, all geared towards getting VinFast up and running.
And another source you shared put the total debt even higher, closer to 630 trillion by Q3 2024. It just seems to keep climbing.
It does. And the timing of their big strategic decisions is fascinating, too. Our sources really highlight Q2 2022.
What happened then?
That was the moment Vingroup officially stopped making gasoline cars altogether.
Ah, the big pivot.
A big pivot, doubling down completely on electric vehicles.
That must have been a huge internal shift. And you can imagine how that would just, boom, accelerate the need for borrowing, couldn't you?
Absolutely. EVs are just a different animal. The R&D, the specific engineering challenges, building specialized factories.
Way more complex, way more expensive than traditional auto manufacturing.
Exactly. So that complexity, the sheer scale of the EV investment, meant they had to borrow much more heavily, both for the initial setup and, as we'll get to, covering those early operating losses at VinFast.
Makes sense. And looking at the shorter term, the pressure seems pretty intense there, too.
Yeah, definitely. One source flagged a record high in Vingroup's short-term debt.
How high?
Over 514 trillion VND by the end of 2024. And just to clarify for everyone, short-term debt is basically money that needs to be paid back within the next year.
Okay, 514 trillion due within 12 months. That's a lot of immediate pressure.
It is indeed. But when you break down that bigger 684 trillion total debt figure, it gets a bit clearer where it all sits.
Right, let's do that. What are the components?
Well, a pretty big chunk, about 139 trillion VND, is actually listed as Customer advances.
Customer advances, so like deposits?
Primarily, yeah. Deposits from people buying Vinhomes properties.
Okay, so while it's debt on the books, it also signals that Vinhomes is still actively selling properties.
Exactly. Then you've got about 61 trillion owed to suppliers.
For materials and parts, presumably?
Right, for both Vinhomes construction projects and, of course, VinFast production lines. Standard stuff for a big operation.
Sure. What else?
Then there's roughly 97 trillion in actual short-term loans, money borrowed from banks, or through issuing short-term bonds.
Okay.
And finally, about 127 trillion VND, classified as long-term debt, meaning it's due further out than 1 year.
All right, so that gives us a better feel for the different types of debt within that huge total. Now, let's maybe zoom in on some of the key subsidiaries, starting with Vinhomes. That's always been the powerhouse, hasn't it?
It really has. And Vinhomes does carry a very significant slice of that total group debt. One source puts it at 340 trillion VND.
Wow, that's half. 50% of the total Vingroup debt sitting with Vinhomes.
According to that source, yes. Though importantly, its net debt, remember, debt minus cash is lower, around 80 trillion. That's about 36% of Vingroup's total net debt.
Okay. And I think I read somewhere that despite that debt load, Vinhomes is actually seen as relatively stable, financially speaking, especially compared to maybe some other property developers in Vietnam right now.
That's a general assessment. Yes, they seem more secure. But it's also true their own debt has been climbing. It hit 308 trillion by Q3 2024.
Which is up considerably from 126 trillion back in 2020.
Right, so even the stable arm is taking on more debt, likely influenced by that bigger group strategy.
It keeps coming back to the mothership's needs.
Pretty much. Vinhomes, especially with its, high-end, high-priced projects like Vinhomes Coloa, it acts as a crucial cash cow.
Generating funds.
Generating significant funds that can then be funneled over to support VinFast's huge capital requirements.
Makes sense. And there was something interesting in the notes about a new land law. How might that affect Vinhomes?
Yeah, that's potentially a big deal. The amended land law from 2024 gets rid of the old fixed land price framework. Starting in 2026, land prices are supposed to be adjusted annually based on market value.
Okay. And Vinhomes has a lot of land, right?
A massive amount. Over 18,000 hectares in their land bank.
So the thinking is, if land prices are adjusted upwards based on market rates.
Exactly. It could significantly increase the value of their existing projects and future developments. That means potentially much higher cash flows down the line.
Which would make Vinhomes an even stronger financial pillar for the group.
Interesting.
It could really bolster their role, yes. A potential future upside there.
Okay, so Vinhomes. Carrying debt but generating cash. Relatively stable, potential boost from the land law. Now, let's turn to VinFast. The numbers here seemed quite stark.
Stark is a good word. One source reported VinFast lost 13.21 trillion VND in just Q3 of 2024 alone.
Just 1 quarter. Oof.
And the total loss for the first 9 months of 2024 was 46.68 trillion VND.
Wow. Where are those losses coming from primarily? Is it just the cost of building cars?
It's largely operating expenses. R&D is a huge one, as you'd expect for a new EV company trying to develop tech.
Yeah, that's costly.
And then sales and marketing expenses are the next biggest chunk, trying to build that brand, get cars sold. It all adds up.
So how much debt does VinFast itself hold?
As of Q3 2024, their total debt was pegged at around 250 trillion VND.
Which is about 36% of the entire group's debt, so also a big chunk.
A very big chunk. And breaking that down, about 169 trillion of it was short-term debt. And that figure's been going up.
Increasing short-term debt.
Okay.
And long-term.
Much smaller, relatively. Around 7.7 trillion VND in long-term debt as of that same time.
And the accumulated losses. Just the total red ink over time.
Eye-watering, as you said earlier.
Yeah.
By the end of September 2024, those accumulative losses hit 95 trillion VND.
Which actually pushed their equity into negative territory, didn't it?
It did. Negative equity of nearly 82 trillion VND by Q2 2024. It just shows the sheer scale of the capital burn needed to get this venture off the ground.
It really does. But it's important to mention the support, right, from the chairman, Tom Not Vong.
Absolutely crucial context. He personally pledged nearly $2 billion to VinFast, running through the end of 2026.
That's a huge personal commitment.
On top of that, Vingroup itself committed to lending VinFast up to 35 trillion VND. And Mr. Vom also provided personal guarantees for another 50 trillion VND.
So massive internal support flowing in to keep it going. It shows how critical this is for them.
Or perhaps how necessary that support is, given the burn rate. It really underlines the immense stakes involved.
No kidding. Now, there was a positive note on sales somewhere, September 2024.
Yeah, a big jump in reported sales volume. 9,300 vehicles delivered that month.
Which actually put them ahead of Toyota in Vietnam for that month, didn't it?
It did, which sounds like a fantastic milestone on the surface.
But there was a catch.
There was a significant caveat raised in the source, yeah.
Yeah.
The concern is that a large percentage of those sales might have been to fleet operators, taxi companies, ride-hailing services.
Ah, the ones with the yellow license plates?
Exactly, rather than sales to individual private buyers, the white license plates.
So while the headline number looks good, it might not reflect strong organic consumer demand just yet.
That's the potential issue. Building that sustainable base of individual buyers is really key for any car company long-term.
Right, a very important distinction. Okay, so Vinhomes is the cash generator. VinFast's is the cash user. What about Vinpearl,
Yeah.
the resorts and tourism arm?
Vinpearl is definitely considered another one of the key cash cows within the Vingroup ecosystem, alongside Vinhomes and also Vincom Retail.
And there's big news potentially coming for Vinpearl, an IPO.
That's the plan. They've officially submitted the paperwork, the Hosuda list on the Ho Chi Minh Stock Exchange. We're talking about listing 1.79 billion shares.
That's a lot of shares. And Vinpearl itself is pretty substantial asset-wise.
Oh yeah, big portfolio. 16,000 hotel rooms, 48 hotels spread across 18 provinces and cities. Total assets were over 67 trillion VND as of mid-2024.
And financially, how are they doing? Tourism took a hit during COVID, obviously.
It did. They had some big losses back then, like almost 10 trillion VND loss in 2021. But the recovery in 2024 looks pretty strong according to the figures.
Oh, yeah.
Revenue hit over 14 trillion VND, way up from 2023, and pre-tax profit jumped to nearly 3 trillion VND, triple the previous year.
That's a solid turnaround. So what's their debt situation like?
As of Q2 2024, total debt was around 42 trillion VND, but they had decent equity too, over 31 trillion. Interestingly, most of that debt is short-term borrowings and finance leases, not much long-term debt on Vinpearl's books.
Okay. And the IPO. What's the main goal? Just raise money for Vinpearl itself?
Not entirely, it seems. The plan is to raise about 5 trillion VND overall.
Right.
But a pretty big slice of that, over 1.8 trillion, is earmarked specifically to buy shares in another Vinpearl entity, Vinpearl Qua Hoi, directly from Vingroup, the parent company.
Ah, okay. So it's a way to move cash raised by the Vinpearl IPO back up to Vingroup Central?
Effectively, yes. Channeling funds to the parent.
Which presumably Vingroup needs right now, given the debt pressures we've been discussing.
But that seems to be the connection. One source explicitly linked this IPO plan and where the money's going to Vingroup's weakening liquidity ratios recently.
Liquidity ratios?
Yeah.
Like their ability to pay short-term bills?
Exactly. Things like the quick ratio and current ratio. If those are declining, it suggests covering those immediate short-term obligations is getting tighter.
So the cash injection from the Vinpearl IPO would definitely help ease that pressure.
Gives them more breathing room in the short term, yes.
It really is all connected, isn't it? The different parts feeding back into the whole. And there was another point about the type of debt Vingroup holds, bonds specifically.
Yeah, so a significant chunk of their debt, especially the stuff maturing in the next, say, 1 to 3 years, is in the form of bonds.
Okay.
And critically, a substantial amount of that is international bonds denominated in U.S. dollars, about 75 trillion VND worth.
Which creates currency risk. Right.
Big time. If the Vietnamese dong weakens against the U.S. dollar, it suddenly costs them more dong to repay that dollar-denominated debt.
And has that actually happened?
Apparently so. One source mentioned a 10 trillion VND loss just in the past year, directly because of those exchange rate fluctuations.
Ouch. Just another headache to manage on top of everything else.
Adds another layer of financial strain, definitely. Yeah. And all this contributes to their debt-to-equity ratio hitting its highest point in the last 10 years.
Which basically means they're more leveraged now than they have been for a long time, using more debt relative to their equity base.
That's the takeaway. However, there was a significant positive mentioned towards the end of 2024.
Oh, yeah. What was that?
Vingroup's operating cash flow turned strongly positive in Q4, over 40 trillion VND generated from operations.
That sounds good. Where'd that come from? Vinhomes?
Most likely, yes. Driven by Vinhomes' strong performance and cash generation.
Okay, so the core real estate engine is still pumping out cash.
It is.
Yeah.
But the other side of the coin is that their investment cash flow was still negative.
Meaning
they were still spending heavily on investments, indicating that ongoing substantial capital deployment into VinFast.
Right. So cash coming in from property, but still flowing out heavily into the EV venture.
That seems to be the dynamic.
Now, we focus a lot on the financials, but Vingroup's broader strategy, their history, that's relevant too, isn't it? This pattern of entering and exiting different businesses.
Oh, absolutely. It's a really critical piece of the puzzle. They have this history, this track record of making bold moves into new sectors.
Like the electronics, the supermarkets.
Right. Adroit e-commerce, Vinpro Electronics, selling off VinCommerce Vinmart, pulling the plug on Vinpearl Air before it even flew, stopping Vin smartphones.
And even selling down their stake in Vincom Retail more recently.
Exactly. These weren't always failures, necessarily. Sometimes they were quite calculated strategic decisions to shed assets and refocus.
And that focus now seems laser sharp, doesn't it?
Undeniably, it's all centered on VinFast. Look at the recent divestments, selling off a big chunk of the Vuyen project in Haiphong, selling VinBrain to NVIDIA.
It all feels like moves to consolidate resources, gather cash, and pour it into the main bet.
That's certainly how it looks. One source used that analogy of the South Korean chaebols.
The big conglomerates there.
Yeah. And how they sometimes face these do-or-die moments with massive strategic bets. It frames Vingroup's current situation similarly. The success or failure of VinFast could have really profound consequences for the entire group.
So let's try and wrap this up then. Bringing together everything from this deep dive, Vingroup is clearly wrestling with this enormous debt load.
The 684 trillion figure is real, even if complex.
And it seems primarily driven by the incredibly ambitious and incredibly costly VinFast project.
That's the main engine of the debt growth, yes.
But they have strong support from their established businesses, particularly Vinhomes, which is still generating cash, and maybe a recovering Vinpearl chipping in too, especially post-IPO.
Those are the crucial financial anchors, absolutely. But the scale of the VinFast losses, the amount of borrowing needed just to keep it going, it's significant. It's shaping everything.
It really is. Vingroup's bet on VinFast is massive. High stakes doesn't quite cover it.
No, it doesn't. The potential upside, if they succeed in the global EV market, is obviously transformative, huge potential reward.
But the risks?
Equally substantial. The financial commitment is immense, the competition's ferocious, the market is tough. There's a real possibility of major setbacks too.
So, considering everything we've talked through today, all the numbers, the strategies, it really leaves you, the listener, with a big question, doesn't it? Looking forward, what do you see as the biggest opportunities for Vingroup? And maybe more importantly, what are the biggest risks they face? This deep dive has definitely uncovered some long-term implications that are still very much unfolding. Something to think about. Thanks for digging into this with us.